Marcus Kane's perfectly planned morning was disrupted by an unexpected voice during the final inspection of an old apartment building. "Please, sir, just one more week," the young woman was pleading. But what caught Marcus's attention were the eyes of the 8-year-old girl standing behind her. Those blue eyes, identical to the ones that had stared back at him from mirrors 25 years ago. In that moment, Marcus had no idea that in this building he had come to demolish, the very foundations of his own life were about to be shaken. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the journey. The morning sun cast long shadows across Manhattan's financial district as Marcus Kane adjusted his Italian silk tie and stepped out of his penthouse elevator. At 48, Marcus had built Kane Properties into a real estate empire worth over $2 billion. His name appeared on skyscrapers across 3 continents, and his reputation as a ruthless developer who never showed mercy was legendary in business circles. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," his assistant Sarah greeted him as he entered his corner office on the 52nd floor of the Kane Tower. "The architects are waiting for the final approval on the Riverside project." Marcus nodded curtly, barely glancing up from his phone where stock prices flickered in real time. The Riverside apartment building, a decrepit 1940s structure in Brooklyn, was scheduled for demolition next week. In its place would rise luxury condominiums that would generate hundreds of millions in profit. "Any holdouts?" Marcus asked, reviewing the quarterly projections that had just crossed his desk. "Just one unit left, sir. For B, a single mother who's been difficult about the relocation process." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. In 20 years of development, he'd encountered every type of resistance. Sentimental homeowners, activist groups, city officials looking for bribes. None of it mattered. Progress waited for no one, and Marcus Kane was progress incarnate. "Handle it," he instructed without looking up. "The demolition crew starts Monday morning." "Actually, sir," Sarah hesitated, "she's requested to speak with you personally. Says she won't leave until she can explain her situation to the person in charge." For the first time that morning, Marcus looked up from his phone. Personal meetings with tenants were beneath his station. That's what property managers and lawyers were for. But something in Sarah's tone suggested this wasn't a routine delay. "What's her story?" he asked, his impatience evident. "Isabella Rodriguez. 29 years old, works 2 jobs, morning shift at a diner, evening shift cleaning offices. Has an 8-year-old daughter named Emma. They've lived in that apartment for 6 years." Marcus returned to his phone. The details meant nothing to him. Numbers were what mattered: construction costs, profit margins, timeline efficiency. Human complications were just obstacles to be removed. "Sir," Sarah continued, "there's something else. She mentioned your name specifically. Said she knew you years ago and that you'd want to hear what she has to say." This got Marcus's attention. In his position, people often claimed personal connections to gain leverage. But Isabella Rodriguez, the name stirred something in the back of his mind, like a half-remembered dream. "Fine," Marcus said after a long pause. "I'll go there myself. This ends today." An hour later, Marcus's black Mercedes pulled up outside the Riverside apartment building. The contrast between his sleek vehicle and the weathered brick structure couldn't have been more stark. This neighborhood, once vibrant, had been slowly decaying for decades. It was exactly the type of area Marcus specialized in transforming, whether the current residents appreciated it or not. The building's entrance was heavy glass doors scratched from years of use. Inside, the lobby smelled of old wood and something else Marcus couldn't identify, the scent of lives lived on tight budgets, of dreams deferred, of making do with less. He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, his handmade Italian shoes echoing in the narrow stairwell. Each step felt heavier than the last, though Marcus attributed this to annoyance at having to handle such a trivial matter personally. Apartment 4B sat at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The door was painted blue, though the paint was chipped and faded. A small wreath made of artificial flowers hung below the peephole, a touch of beauty in an otherwise deteriorating environment. Marcus knocked firmly. Three sharp raps that communicated authority and impatience. "Just a moment," came a woman's voice from inside, followed by the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened, and Marcus found himself face to face with a woman whose dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, whose tired eyes held a mixture of hope and desperation. She was pretty, despite the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, despite the worn clothing and the weight of whatever struggles she'd been carrying. "Mr. Kane," she said, and there was something in her voice, recognition, perhaps even relief. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd remember me." Before Marcus could respond, a small figure appeared behind the woman. An 8-year-old girl with striking blue eyes and dark hair that fell in gentle waves around her shoulders. She looked up at Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Those eyes. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition so profound it momentarily took his breath away. They were his eyes, the same unusual shade of blue that had always made him stand out in family photos, the same eyes that had stared back at him from every mirror for 48 years. "Isabella," Marcus said slowly, the name feeling strange on his tongue. Memories began to surface, hazy at first, then with increasing clarity. A college party 15 years ago. A literature major with dreams of becoming a writer. A night that had felt significant at the time but had been buried under years of ambition and success. "This is my daughter, Emma," Isabella said, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "Emma, this is Mr. Kane. He's someone Mommy knew a long time ago." Emma stepped forward with a confidence that seemed to belie her small stature. She looked directly at Marcus, studying his face with an intensity that was unsettling. "Are you really going to tear down our home?" Emma asked, her voice clear and direct. There was no accusation in her tone, just a child's straightforward curiosity about the adult world that was disrupting her life. Marcus had prepared for anger, for tears, for the kind of emotional manipulation he'd encountered countless times before. He hadn't prepared for this, a simple, honest question from a child whose eyes reflected his own. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go finish your homework while Mr. Kane and I talk?" Isabella suggested gently. But Emma didn't move. She continued to study Marcus's face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You have sad eyes," she observed matter-of-factly. "Like the man in Mommy's old pictures." The comment hit Marcus unexpectedly. Children, he'd noticed, had a way of seeing through the carefully constructed facades that adults spent lifetimes building. In boardrooms, Marcus was known for his steely gaze, his ability to intimidate through sheer presence. This child saw sadness. "Emma, please," Isabella said, her voice carrying a note of tension. "Let the adults talk." As Emma reluctantly retreated to her room, Isabella gestured for Marcus to sit on a worn but clean sofa. The apartment was small. Marcus estimated it couldn't be more than 600 square feet, but it was meticulously maintained. Books lined makeshift shelves, and Emma's artwork was carefully displayed on the refrigerator. Despite its modest size, it felt like a home in a way that Marcus's penthouse, with its designer furniture and panoramic views, never had. "You probably don't remember me," Isabella began, settling into a chair across from him. "It was 15 years ago, at that party at Columbia. You were getting your MBA, I was finishing my literature degree." Marcus did remember, though the details had been buried under years of other memories, other relationships that had been sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. Isabella had been different from the other women he'd dated, less interested in his family's wealth, more fascinated by his thoughts on art, literature, philosophy. They'd spent the entire night talking, walking through Central Park until dawn. "I remember," Marcus said quietly. "You wanted to write children's books." Isabella's smile was wistful. "I did. I still do, actually. I work on them in the evenings after Emma goes to sleep. Nothing published yet, but I keep trying." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Marcus found himself studying the apartment more closely, noting details that spoke of a life lived carefully, generic brand groceries neatly organized in the small kitchen, furniture that was old but well-maintained, a stack of library books on the coffee table. "Isabella," Marcus began, then stopped. He'd been about to launch into his standard speech about development, progress, the greater good of urban renewal. But the words felt hollow in this space, in front of this woman who had once known him before he'd become the man he was now. "She's yours, Marcus," Isabella said quietly, saving him from whatever he'd been about to say. "Emma. She's your daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that, once crossed, would change everything. Marcus felt his carefully ordered world tilt on its axis. He thought of Emma's eyes, so startlingly similar to his own, and suddenly understood why Isabella had insisted on seeing him personally. "That's impossible," Marcus said, though even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't. The timeline fit. The resemblance was undeniable. But accepting it would mean accepting that for 8 years, he had had a daughter, a child who was part of him, living just miles away while he built his empire, oblivious to her existence. "I tried to contact you," Isabella continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "When I found out I was pregnant. But you'd graduated, started working at your father's company. Your assistant said you were in meetings, then that you were traveling. After a few months, I realized you'd moved on." Marcus thought back to that time in his life. Fresh out of business school, desperate to prove himself worthy of the Kane family legacy. He'd been working 18-hour days, traveling constantly, building the network that would eventually allow him to surpass even his father's achievements. Personal calls, personal relationships, everything had been secondary to the drive for success. "I would have." Marcus started, then realized he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Would he have stepped up? Would he have chosen fatherhood over the ambition that had defined him? Or would he have seen Isabella and Emma as complications to be managed, obstacles to his grand plans? "I didn't need your money," Isabella said, as if reading his thoughts. "I needed Emma to have a father, but I wasn't going to force that role on someone who didn't want it. So I raised her myself." With help, Emma's voice came from the doorway. She'd apparently finished her homework and returned to listen to the adult conversation. "Mommy had help from Mrs. Chen next door, and from the nice man at the grocery store who always gives me extra cookies." Marcus looked at this child, his child, and saw resilience that humbled him. At 8 years old, Emma had learned to find family and support in unexpected places, to create stability in an uncertain world. Meanwhile, Marcus had spent those same 8 years accumulating more wealth than he could spend in several lifetimes, building a legacy of concrete and steel while remaining completely unaware of the most important legacy he'd already created. "Emma," Isabella said gently, "this is a grown-up conversation." "But it's about me too," Emma replied with logic that was hard to argue with. She looked directly at Marcus. "Are you my daddy?" The question, asked with such straightforward innocence, hit Marcus harder than any hostile corporate takeover, any adversarial negotiation he'd ever faced. In that moment, surrounded by the modest furnishings of this small apartment, Marcus Kane, billionaire real estate mogul, found himself utterly without words. Emma waited patiently for his answer, those familiar blue eyes fixed on his face with the same intensity he'd once brought to reading financial reports. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I think I am." Emma considered this information with the seriousness of a child processing something that would change everything she understood about her world. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "Cool," she said simply. "Does this mean we don't have to move?" The question brought Marcus back to the reality of why he'd come here in the first place. The demolition was scheduled to begin in 4 days. The construction crews were hired, the permits obtained, the luxury condominiums already being marketed to wealthy buyers who would never worry about generic brand groceries or making rent. But looking at Emma, at his daughter, Marcus realized that tearing down this building would mean destroying the only home she'd ever known. More than that, it would mean obliterating the life Isabella had built for their child through years of sacrifice and struggle. "We need to talk," Marcus said to Isabella. "Alone." Emma seemed to understand that this was not a negotiation she could influence. She retreated to her room, but not before giving Marcus one more long, evaluating look. "I know what you're thinking," Isabella said once they were alone. that this changes everything about your development project. But I'm not asking you to stop your plans for us. I just wanted Emma to meet her father before we had to leave. Marcus studied Isabella's face, noting the careful way she held herself, as if braced for disappointment. He realized that she'd spent 8 years protecting Emma from the possibility of rejection, building a life where her daughter's self-worth wasn't dependent on the approval of a father who might never appear. "Where will you go?" Marcus asked. "I've been looking at places in Queens. The rent's cheaper there, and there's a good school district. It'll be a longer commute to my jobs, but we'll manage." The casual way she discussed uprooting her entire life, the matter-of-fact acceptance of hardship, struck Marcus as both admirable and tragic. Here was a woman who had built a stable home for their child despite having limited resources, while he had spent those same years accumulating vast wealth but had never created anything that felt remotely like a home. "Isabella," Marcus said slowly, "I want to do a DNA test." She nodded, as if she'd been expecting this. "Of course. I understand you need to be certain. And I want to." Marcus paused, struggling with words that felt foreign in his mouth. "I want to be part of Emma's life. If you'll let me." For the first time since he'd arrived, Isabella's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Marcus, you have your own life. Your company, I'm sure you have relationships, commitments. Emma and we're fine on our own. We always have been." But even as Isabella spoke these words, Marcus could see the hope she was trying to suppress, the possibility she was afraid to acknowledge. 8 years of single parenthood, of working 2 jobs, of carrying all the responsibility alone, it had made her strong, but it had also made her wary of depending on anyone else. "What if I stopped the demolition?" Marcus asked suddenly. Isabella stared at him in surprise. "You can't do that. This project must be worth millions to you." "Hundreds of millions," Marcus corrected. "But money isn't everything." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. For 2 decades, money had been not just everything but the only thing that mattered. Profit margins, return on investment, market positioning, these had been the metrics by which he measured success, meaning, even self-worth. "Marcus," Isabella said carefully, "you don't have to upend your entire business plan because of this. Emma and I will be fine." But Marcus was beginning to understand that fine wasn't enough. Not anymore. He'd spent years congratulating himself on his success while his daughter learned to be grateful for cookies from a kind grocer, while Isabella worked 2 jobs to maintain the modest home they were about to lose. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. "About the building, about Emma, about everything." Isabella nodded. "Of course. This is a lot to process." As Marcus prepared to leave, Emma appeared again in the doorway. She approached him slowly, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," she said, holding it out. Marcus unfolded the paper to reveal a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a building. Above them, Emma had written in careful block letters, "My daddy and me." Looking at this simple drawing, Marcus felt something break open inside his chest. All his life, he'd pursued grand gestures, massive construction projects, billion-dollar acquisitions, achievements that would be remembered long after he was gone. But this small piece of paper, created by the daughter he'd never known existed, felt more valuable than any deal he'd ever closed. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice unexpectedly thick with emotion. "I'll treasure this." Emma smiled, the same smile he remembered seeing in old photographs of himself as a child. "Will you come back and visit us?" Marcus looked at Isabella, who nodded slightly. "Yes," he promised. "Very soon." As Marcus walked back to his car, Emma's drawing carefully tucked into his jacket pocket, he found himself seeing the Riverside neighborhood differently. The weathered buildings weren't just obstacles to progress anymore, they were homes where families like his own had put down roots, created memories, built lives that mattered. That night, Marcus sat in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the Manhattan skyline that had always represented his success. The city lights twinkled below him like stars, beautiful but distant. Emma's drawing lay on his desk next to quarterly reports and architectural plans, a splash of innocent color among the serious documents of adult responsibility. For the first time in years, Marcus Kane, master of real estate development, feared negotiator, billionaire entrepreneur, had no idea what his next move should be. All he knew was that tomorrow, everything would have to change. The DNA test results arrived 3 days later, though Marcus had known what they would confirm from the moment he'd looked into Emma's eyes. Dr. Patricia Chen, the geneticist Marcus had hired for the expedited testing, delivered the news with clinical precision. The probability of paternity is 99.97%, she said over the phone. Genetically speaking, Mr. Kane, there is no doubt that Emma Rodriguez is your biological daughter. Marcus thanked her and hung up, though the confirmation felt almost anticlimactic. He'd spent the past 72 hours thinking about nothing else, canceling meetings, postponing decisions, and struggling with the most profound identity crisis of his adult life. He was a father. He had been a father for 8 years without knowing it. Somewhere in Brooklyn, his daughter was probably doing homework at a small kitchen table while her mother prepared dinner on a budget that Marcus spent on a single business lunch. His assistant Sarah knocked on his office door. "Mr. Kane? The demolition foreman is here. He needs final authorization for Monday's project." Marcus looked up from his desk, where Emma's drawing lay beside the official DNA results. "Send him in." Chuck Morrison was exactly what Central Casting would order for a demolition foreman, thick-shouldered, weathered hands, and the kind of direct manner that came from decades of tearing things down so other people could build them up again. "Mr. Kane," Chuck said, settling his considerable bulk into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "My crew's ready to go Monday morning. Should have that old building down in 3 days, cleaned up and ready for your construction boys by the end of the week." Marcus nodded absently. "Chuck, in your experience, how long would it take to renovate that building instead of demolishing it?" Chuck's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Renovate? Mr. Kane, that building's got good bones, but it'd be cheaper to start from scratch. New plumbing, new electrical, new everything. You're talking about maybe 18 months and costs that would eat into your profit margins something fierce." "That's not what I asked," Marcus said quietly. "How long?" Chuck scratched his graying beard, clearly puzzled by this unexpected turn. "Well, if you really wanted to restore it properly, maintain the character while updating the infrastructure, I'd say 2 years, maybe more. But Mr. Kane, if you don't mind me asking, why would you want to? This luxury condo project's been in the works for 3 years. You've got buyers lined up, financing in place." Marcus stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the city he'd helped reshape through decades of development. From this height, the individual buildings looked like pieces on a chessboard, elements to be moved and manipulated in service of some greater strategy. But now Marcus was thinking about one specific building, where his daughter colored pictures at a kitchen table and what was Isabella to him now? The mother of his child, certainly. Someone who had known him before he became the man he was now. Someone who had raised their daughter with strength and grace while he remained oblivious to their existence. "Chuck," Marcus said finally, "I need you to postpone the demolition." "Postpone?" "Mr. Kane, I've got 12 guys scheduled, equipment rented, disposal contracts signed." "I'll cover any cancellation costs," Marcus interrupted. "I need time to reconsider the project." Chuck stared at him in obvious bewilderment. In 20 years of working for Marcus Kane, he'd never seen the man reverse course on a major decision. Marcus was known for his absolute certainty, his unwavering commitment to seeing projects through regardless of obstacles or objections. "Mr. Kane, are you feeling all right? This isn't like you." Marcus almost smiled at that. Chuck was right, this wasn't like him at all. The Marcus Kane of a week ago would never have allowed personal considerations to interfere with business decisions. But that Marcus Kane hadn't known he had a daughter. "I'm fine, Chuck. Just exploring new options." After the foreman left, shaking his head in confusion, Marcus sat alone in his office trying to understand what was happening to him. For 2 decades, his identity had been built around achievement, accumulation, the relentless pursuit of success. He'd sacrificed relationships, personal happiness, even basic human connections in service of building his empire. Now, suddenly, none of that seemed as important as a small apartment in Brooklyn where his daughter was learning to read, where Isabella worked 2 jobs to maintain the home they'd built together. His phone rang. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Kane, you have Mrs. Rodriguez on line 2. She says it's about Emma." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate as he picked up the phone. "Isabella?" "Marcus, I'm sorry to bother you at work." Isabella's voice carried a tension that immediately put him on alert. "Emma's been asking about you constantly since you visited. She wants to know when you're coming back, if you're really her father, why you haven't been part of her life before now." I'm not sure how to answer her questions. Marcus closed his eyes, imagining Emma's confusion and curiosity. At 8 years old, she was too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, the ways people could pass by each other in life without ever connecting. "What have you told her?" Marcus asked. "The truth. That we knew each other a long time ago, that circumstances kept us apart, but that you're a good man who would have been in her life if he'd known about her." The faith Isabella expressed in him felt both undeserved and inspiring. She could have told Emma that her father was selfish, career-obsessed, the kind of man who valued profit margins over people. Instead, she'd chosen to paint him as someone worthy of their daughter's love. "Isabella," Marcus said, "I got the DNA results today. And? She's mine. Officially, scientifically, undeniably mine." A long pause. When Isabella spoke again, her voice was softer. "How do you feel about that?" It was a simple question, but Marcus found himself struggling to answer. How did he feel? Overwhelmed. Terrified. Grateful. Regretful about the 8 years he'd missed. Angry at himself for being so focused on success that he'd missed the most important thing that had ever happened to him. Responsible, Marcus said finally. Like I have 8 years of absence to make up for. Marcus, you don't owe us anything. Emma and I have been fine. Stop saying that, Marcus interrupted more sharply than he'd intended. Stop saying you're fine. Maybe you are fine, maybe you've done an incredible job raising our daughter on your own. But fine isn't good enough anymore. She's my daughter too, and I want her to have more than fine. Another pause. Marcus could hear the sound of traffic in the background, the ambient noise of Isabella's world, public transportation, busy streets, the urban soundtrack of people who couldn't afford to live above the city's chaos. What are you saying? Isabella asked carefully. I'm saying I want to be part of Emma's life. Really part of it, not just weekend visits or birthday presents. I want to know what she's learning in school, what books she likes to read, what she wants to be when she grows up. Marcus, that's wonderful, but your life, you must work 80 hours a week. Emma needs consistency, reliability. She can't have a father who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when business calls. The criticism stung because it was accurate. Marcus's calendar was booked months in advance with meetings, conferences, site visits, and negotiations. His life was structured around the demands of building and maintaining a business empire. There was no room for spontaneity, for the kind of presence that parenting required. Then I'll change, Marcus said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. I'll reorganize my priorities. It's not that simple, Marcus. You can't just decide to be a different person because you found out you have a daughter. But maybe that was exactly what he could do. Maybe discovering Emma wasn't just about adding fatherhood to his existing life. Maybe it was about fundamentally reevaluating what kind of life he wanted to live. Isabella, Marcus said, I want to take you both to dinner tomorrow night. Somewhere nice. I want to get to know Emma properly, and I want to talk to you about our future. Our future? Emma's future, Marcus corrected quickly. How we can work together to give her everything she deserves. Isabella was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, she spoke. There's a small Italian restaurant Emma loves. Nothing fancy, but the owner's daughter is Emma's age and they play together while the adults eat. Would that work? Marcus thought of the exclusive restaurants where he usually conducted business dinners, places where children weren't welcome, where conversations were conducted in hushed tones over wine that cost more than Isabella's weekly grocery budget. That sounds perfect, he said. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized he was smiling for the first time in days. Tomorrow night, he would have dinner with his daughter. Not a business dinner, not a networking event, not a strategic meeting designed to advance his interests. Just a father getting to know his child. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. But for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Kane was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with profit margins or market positioning. He was looking forward to being a father. The next evening, Marcus found himself standing outside Billionaire, a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn that he never would have noticed in his previous life. Through the windows, he could see families sharing meals at checkered tablecloth tables, children drawing on paper placemats while their parents talked and laughed. This was so far removed from his usual world of elegant establishments and power lunches that Marcus felt like an anthropologist studying an alien culture. But as he pushed open the door and heard Emma call his name with genuine excitement, Marcus realized that maybe this was the culture he wanted to belong to. "Marcus! Over here!" Emma waved enthusiastically from a corner table where she sat next to Isabella. As Marcus approached their table, he noticed the care Isabella had taken with her appearance. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked like someone he could imagine sharing a life with. Emma, meanwhile, practically bounced in her seat with excitement. "Mommy let me order a Shirley Temple," she announced proudly. "And look, they gave me extra cherries." Marcus slid into the seat across from them, feeling awkward and out of place. In boardrooms, he commanded attention through presence and authority. Here, he was just a man trying to figure out how to talk to his 8-year-old daughter. "How was school today?" Marcus asked, falling back on the kind of generic question he remembered adults asking him when he was Emma's age. "Really good," Emma replied enthusiastically. "We're reading Charlotte's Web, and I'm the best reader in my class. Mrs. Patterson says I might be able to skip to 4th grade reading level next year." Marcus felt a surge of pride that surprised him with its intensity. "That's wonderful, Emma. You must be very smart." "Mommy says I get that from her," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But maybe I get some smart from you too?" The innocent question highlighted how little Emma knew about him, how much of his life was a mystery to her. Marcus realized that his daughter knew him only as the man who was going to tear down her home, the mysterious figure from her mother's past who had suddenly appeared. "What kind of work do you do?" Emma continued, her curiosity evident. Marcus glanced at Isabella, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I build things," he said finally. "Office buildings, apartments, places where people live and work." "Like the man who built our apartment?" "Sort of," Marcus replied, though the comparison felt uncomfortable. The man who had built Emma's apartment had created affordable housing for working families. Marcus built luxury developments for wealthy buyers who saw real estate as investment opportunities rather than homes. "Do you like building things?" Emma asked. It was such a simple question, but Marcus found himself struggling to answer honestly. Did he like building things? Or did he like the money, the power, the reputation that came from building things? "I like creating something new," Marcus said carefully. "Taking an empty space and imagining what it could become." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "Like when I draw pictures. I start with a blank paper and then make it into something beautiful." The comparison charmed Marcus, though he wondered if Emma would still see his work as creative if she knew that most of his creations involved destroying existing communities to make room for developments that excluded people like her and Isabella. Their food arrived, and Marcus watched with fascination as Emma carefully organized her spaghetti into neat sections before eating. She approached her meal with the same methodical precision he brought to business deals, though in her case it seemed motivated by delight rather than efficiency. Tell me about your favorite things, Marcus said to Emma as they ate. What do you like to do when you're not at school? Emma's face lit up. I love to read. And I like to draw pictures, and sometimes Mommy and I go to the library and I pick out 5 books, that's the most they let you take, and we read them together before bedtime. What kinds of books do you like? Stories about kids who go on adventures. And books about animals. And sometimes fairy tales, but not the scary ones. Emma paused thoughtfully. Do you like to read? Marcus thought about the reading material that filled his days, financial reports, legal documents, market analyses. I read for work, he said. But I used to love storybooks when I was your age. What was your favorite? Marcus searched his memory, reaching back to childhood interests that had been buried under decades of adult responsibilities. There was a book about a boy who could talk to animals, he said finally. I read it over and over until the pages started falling out. Emma's eyes widened with interest. I would love to talk to animals. What would you say to them if you could? The question required Marcus to engage his imagination in a way he hadn't done in years. I think I'd ask them what they thought about the world. If they were happy, if they needed anything, what they wished humans understood about them. That's exactly what I would ask. Emma exclaimed, delighted by their shared perspective. As dinner continued, Marcus found himself relaxing into the conversation. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, her curiosity engaging. She asked thoughtful questions and listened to his answers with genuine interest. More than that, she seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, laughing at his jokes and eagerly sharing her own stories. Isabella watched these exchanges with a mixture of pleasure and concern. Marcus could see her evaluating every interaction, assessing whether he was someone who could be trusted with their daughter's emotional well-being. Emma, sweetheart, Isabella said as they finished their meal, why don't you go say hello to Sophia? She nodded toward a girl Emma's age who was coloring at a nearby table. Her mother and I need to talk to Marcus about grown-up things. Emma nodded and skipped off to join her friend, leaving Marcus and Isabella alone for the first time since that awkward conversation in her apartment. She's incredible, Marcus said, watching Emma show Sophia something in her coloring book. You've done an amazing job raising her. Thank you, Isabella replied. She's the best thing I've ever done with my life. Isabella, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The directness of Marcus's tone got Isabella's attention. She set down her wine glass and looked at him expectantly. Why didn't you try harder to reach me when Emma was born? Marcus asked. I mean, I understand that I was difficult to contact, but there must have been other ways. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze shifting to Emma, who was now showing Sophia how to draw what appeared to be a unicorn. Because I was afraid, Isabella said finally. Afraid that you'd see Emma and me as complications you didn't want to deal with. Afraid that you'd offer money to make us go away. Afraid that you'd want to be involved just enough to disrupt Emma's life, but not enough to actually be a father to her. The honesty of her answer hit Marcus harder than any business rejection ever had. Isabella had protected Emma from the possibility of his rejection by never giving him the chance to accept or reject them at all. And now? Marcus asked. Are you still afraid? Isabella studied his face carefully. Yes, she admitted. But I'm also hopeful. Emma needs a father, Marcus. Not just financial support, but someone who will show up for school plays and soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. Someone who will be there when she has nightmares, or when she's excited about something she learned, or when she just needs to know that her father thinks she's the most important person in the world. I want to be that person, Marcus said earnestly. I know I don't have experience, and I know my track record with personal relationships isn't great, but Isabella, I want to learn. I want to be the father Emma deserves. What about your work? Your company? You've spent 20 years building Kane Properties. Are you really willing to step back from that? It was the crucial question, the one Marcus had been avoiding even in his own thoughts. His company wasn't just his livelihood, it was his identity, his legacy, the measure by which he'd always defined his worth as a person. I've been thinking about that, Marcus said slowly. What if success isn't just about how much money you make or how many buildings you put up? What if it's about the lives you touch, the people you help, the family you build? Isabella's expression softened. That's a beautiful sentiment, Marcus. But Emma can't eat sentiment. She needs stability, consistency, someone who will be there for her regardless of what else is happening in his life. Then that's what I'll give her, Marcus replied. Isabella, I want to ask you something else, and this might sound crazy. What? Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything between them. What if we tried to be a family? All three of us, together? Isabella stared at him in shock. Marcus, we barely know each other anymore. We haven't seen each other in 15 years, and now you're talking about playing house because we have a daughter together? I'm not talking about playing house, Marcus said firmly. I'm talking about building something real. Look, I know this is complicated. I know we'd have to figure out a lot of things. But Emma deserves to have both her parents in her life, and maybe we deserve a chance to see what we could build together. Before Isabella could respond, Emma returned to their table, her face glowing with excitement. Mommy, Sophia's family is going to the zoo next weekend and they invited me to come. Can I go? Please? Isabella smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. We'll see, sweetheart. We'll talk about it later. Marcus, do you want to come to the zoo too? Emma asked, turning to him with hopeful eyes. The invitation, offered with such casual trust, nearly overwhelmed Marcus. Here was his daughter, asking him to be part of her normal life, her everyday adventures. Not a special occasion or a formal meeting, just a simple family outing. I would love that, Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. If it's okay with your mother. Isabella looked between Marcus and Emma, seeing the genuine connection forming between father and daughter. Finally, she nodded. I think that would be nice. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Emma slipped her small hand into Marcus's much larger one. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. Thank you for dinner, Emma said as they walked toward the street. This was the best night ever. Marcus looked down at his daughter, then at Isabella walking beside them, and realized that Emma was right. Despite all his wealth, all his achievements, all the exclusive experiences his money could buy, this simple dinner at a neighborhood restaurant had been the best night of his life. But as they stood on the sidewalk saying their goodbyes, Marcus knew that one perfect evening wasn't enough to build a family on. Tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to reshape his entire life around the two people who had suddenly become more important than anything else in his world. The question was, would he be brave enough to actually do it? 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in his office looking out at the Manhattan skyline, but his mind was in Brooklyn, where Emma was probably getting ready for school and Isabella was preparing for another long day of work. In the weeks since their dinner at Billionaire, Marcus had seen Emma every few days, taking her to movies, museums, and that memorable zoo trip where she'd insisted on explaining the life story of every animal they encountered. Each interaction with his daughter had reinforced his growing conviction that being Emma's father was the most important role he would ever play. But it had also highlighted how little he understood about the daily realities of her and Isabella's life. Marcus had been shocked to learn that Isabella's health insurance didn't cover dental care, which meant Emma had been living with a cavity that needed attention. He'd been dismayed to discover that the heat in their apartment was inconsistent, leaving them cold on winter nights. Most troubling of all, he'd realized that Isabella was working herself to exhaustion trying to provide for Emma while maintaining their modest lifestyle. These revelations had crystallized something in Marcus's mind. His daughter deserved better than just adequate. She deserved every opportunity, every advantage, every comfort that his wealth could provide. But more than that, she deserved a father who was present for the important moments and the ordinary ones alike. The intercom on his desk buzzed. Mr. Kane, your 10 a.m. appointment is here. Send them in, Marcus replied, straightening his tie and preparing for what he knew would be one of the most important meetings of his career. Isabella entered his office looking nervous and out of place among the expensive furnishings and panoramic city views. She wore her best dress, but Marcus could see the care with which she'd chosen her outfit, the effort she'd made to look appropriate for his professional environment. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, gesturing toward the sitting area rather than the formal conference table. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "I'm fine," Isabella replied, though her posture suggested she was anything but fine. She looked around the office with wide eyes, taking in the evidence of Marcus's success. "This is quite a place you have here." "Isabella," Marcus began, settling into the chair across from her, "I asked you here because I have a proposition for you. Actually, several propositions." "I'm listening." Marcus had rehearsed this conversation, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself struggling with how to begin. Everything he wanted to say sounded either presumptuous or inadequate. "First," he said finally, "I want to establish a trust fund for Emma. Enough to cover her education through college, plus money for anything else she might need." Isabella's expression immediately became guarded. "Marcus, we've talked about this. Emma and I don't need your money." "This isn't charity," Marcus interrupted gently. "This is a father providing for his daughter. Isabella, you shouldn't have to work 2 jobs to give Emma basic necessities. You shouldn't have to choose between paying for her dental care and paying rent." "How do you know about?" Isabella started, then stopped. "You've been checking up on us." "I've been trying to understand your situation so I can help appropriately," Marcus corrected. "Isabella, I make more money in a month than you make in several years. It's not fair that my daughter goes without things while I live in luxury." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her struggling with pride and practicality. Finally, she spoke. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A trust fund that would eliminate your financial stress completely. You could quit one of your jobs, maybe both of them. You could focus on your writing, spend more time with Emma, not worry about making rent or buying groceries." "And what would you want in return?" The question revealed Isabella's wariness, her assumption that every offer came with strings attached. Marcus realized that years of struggling to make ends meet had taught her to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. "I want to be part of Emma's life," Marcus said honestly. "Not just weekend visits, but real involvement. I want to be there for school events, help with homework, take her to doctor's appointments. I want to be her father in every sense of the word." Isabella nodded slowly. "That sounds reasonable. What else?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I want us to move in together." Isabella's eyes widened in shock. "Marcus, we talked about this. We barely know each other anymore." "So let's get to know each other," Marcus replied. "Isabella, Emma needs stability, consistency, a real family. I have a house, actually, several houses, and more space than I could use in a lifetime. You and Emma could each have your own rooms, your own space, but we'd be together as a family unit." "As roommates raising a child together?" Isabella asked skeptically. "As whatever we decide to be," Marcus said carefully. "Look, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking you to give us a chance to see what we could build together. For Emma's sake, and maybe for ours too." Isabella stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. Marcus waited, knowing that this decision would determine not just Emma's future, but his own. "There's something else I need to tell you," Isabella said without turning around. "About why I never pursued you more aggressively when Emma was born." "What?" "I was scared that if you knew about Emma, you'd try to take her away from me. That you'd have lawyers and money and resources I couldn't fight, and that I'd lose the most important thing in my life." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own feelings of loss and regret that he hadn't considered Isabella's perspective, a young single mother facing the possibility of losing her child to a wealthy man who could provide more than she ever could. "Isabella, I would never try to take Emma away from you," Marcus said firmly. "You're her mother. You've raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her. I could never replace that, and I wouldn't want to." Isabella turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "But if we tried this, living together, being a family, and it didn't work out, where would that leave Emma?" She's already attached to you, Marcus. If you decided this was too complicated or too much work and walked away, it would destroy her. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders. Emma's emotional well-being, her ability to trust and form relationships, her fundamental sense of security, all of it would be shaped by the choices he made in the coming months. I won't walk away, Marcus said quietly. Isabella, I've spent my entire adult life building things, companies, buildings, wealth. But I've never created anything as important as the relationship I have with Emma. I won't abandon the most meaningful project of my life. Isabella studied his face, searching for signs of doubt or uncertainty. Finally, she nodded. Okay. Okay? Okay, we'll try it. But I have conditions. Marcus felt a surge of hope and relief. Whatever you need. First, this isn't about us getting back together romantically. This is about co-parenting Emma and seeing if we can build a friendship and a family unit. Agreed. Second, I keep working. Maybe not both jobs, but I need to maintain some independence, some sense that I'm contributing. Of course. Third, if either of us decides this isn't working, we handle it maturely and put Emma's needs first. No lawyers, no custody battles, no using her as a weapon against each other. Absolutely. Isabella took a deep breath. Then yes, Marcus. Let's try to be a family. As Isabella left his office that day, Marcus stood at his window looking out at the city he'd spent decades conquering. For the first time in his adult life, his future seemed to stretch beyond quarterly reports and development projects. He was about to become not just a father, but part of a family, imperfect, uncertain, but real in a way that no business achievement had ever been. That evening, Marcus drove to Brooklyn to share the news with Emma. He found her at the kitchen table doing homework, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she worked on math problems. Emma, he said, settling into the chair beside her, how would you feel about living in a bigger house? With your own room and a backyard to play in? Emma's eyes widened with excitement. Really? Would Mommy come too? Of course. We'd all live there together, like a real family. Emma threw her arms around Marcus's neck, nearly knocking him off his chair with her enthusiasm. This is the best day ever, she exclaimed. As Marcus held his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling the warmth of her trust, he realized that Emma was right. This was indeed the best day ever, the day he stopped building an empire and started building a home. 6 months later, Marcus woke up to the sound of laughter echoing through the halls of his Connecticut estate. The house that had once been a showcase of expensive furniture and sterile perfection now showed signs of real life, Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, Isabella's books on the coffee table, toys scattered across the living room floor. Marcus found Isabella and Emma in the kitchen, working together to make pancakes. Emma stood on a step stool, carefully measuring flour while Isabella guided her hands. Both were dusted with cooking ingredients and laughing at some private joke. Good morning, family, Marcus said, the word still feeling wonderfully foreign on his tongue. Daddy. Emma called out, rushing to hug him with flour-covered hands. We're making special pancakes with chocolate chips. Just what I wanted for breakfast, Marcus replied, lifting Emma up and spinning her around. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had discovered that being a father was both harder and more rewarding than any business challenge he'd ever faced. Emma was brilliant, funny, and affectionate, but she was also an 8-year-old with 8-year-old needs, consistency, patience, and attention that couldn't be scheduled into convenient time slots. Marcus had restructured his entire life around his new role. He worked from home 3 days a week, attended every school event that Emma was involved in, and had learned to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. His business colleagues were initially puzzled by his new priorities, but the results spoke for themselves. Kane Properties was more profitable than ever, and Marcus was happier than he'd been in decades. Isabella had quit her evening job and was now working part-time at a bookstore while pursuing her dream of writing children's books. Her first manuscript, about a little girl who discovers her father is a building architect, was currently being reviewed by publishers. The financial security that Marcus provided had given her the freedom to pursue her passion, but more importantly, it had given her time to be present for Emma's childhood. "Marcus," Isabella said as they sat around the breakfast table, "Emma has something to ask you." Emma looked nervous but determined. "Daddy, you know how Sophia at school is having a daddy-daughter dance at her school?" "Yes." "Well, my school is having one too, and I was wondering if maybe you might want to go with me." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. 6 months ago, he'd been a stranger to this child. Now she was asking him to be her date to the most important social event of her 8-year-old year. "Emma," he said solemnly, "I would be honored to escort you to your daddy-daughter dance." Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? And you'll dance with me even if I step on your feet?" "Especially if you step on my feet," Marcus replied, making her giggle. As they finished breakfast, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had changed. The Riverside apartment building, the property that had brought them all together, had been renovated rather than demolished. It now provided affordable housing for working families, with Isabella serving on the board that oversaw its management. The luxury condominiums had been built on a different site, one that didn't require displacing existing residents. Marcus had discovered that success could be measured in ways that had nothing to do with profit margins. It could be measured in Emma's report cards, and Isabella's growing confidence as a writer, and the laughter that now filled his home. "Daddy," Emma said as they prepared to leave for school, "do you ever miss your old life? When it was just you and no kids to worry about?" It was a perceptive question from his brilliant daughter. Marcus knelt down to meet her eyes, wanting to give her the honest answer she deserved. "Emma," he said, "my old life was like living in a beautiful house where all the rooms were empty. It looked perfect from the outside, but it was lonely and cold inside. Now I have a house filled with people I love, and even when it's messy or noisy or complicated, it's home." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Then she surprised him by wrapping her arms around his neck and whispering, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart," Marcus whispered back, holding her close and marveling at how 3 simple words from his daughter could mean more than any business deal he'd ever closed. As Marcus watched Emma run toward her school building, her backpack bouncing with each step, he thought about the drawing she'd given him on that first day, 2 stick figures standing in front of a building, labeled "My Daddy and Me." That simple crayon drawing now hung in a place of honor in his office, surrounded by awards and achievements that suddenly seemed far less important. Isabella joined him on the sidewalk, and together they watched their daughter disappear into the school building. "Any regrets?" Isabella asked, echoing Emma's earlier question. Marcus considered this seriously. He'd given up the single-minded pursuit of wealth that had defined his adult life. He'd reorganized his priorities around people rather than projects. He'd opened his heart to the possibility of love, commitment, and family, all things he'd avoided for decades. "None," he said finally, taking Isabella's hand in his. "Not a single one." As they walked back to their car, Marcus realized that the most successful acquisition of his career hadn't been a company or a property. It had been this family, unexpected, complicated, perfect in its imperfections. He'd found treasure in the most unlikely place, not in the building he'd planned to demolish, but in the hearts of the people who had lived there. Marcus Kane, billionaire real estate developer, had finally learned the most important lesson of his life. Home wasn't a place you built, it was a feeling you created with the people you loved.